All right, I'd like to introduce Dr. Steve Salisbury. Steve is a vertebrate paleontologist at the University of Queensland, where he divides his time between teaching and research as a senior lecturer in the School of Biological Sciences. He is also a research associate at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and an associate editor for the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology. Steve's research focuses on the evolution of Gondwanan, is that right? Thank you. Continental vertebrates, in particular dinosaurs and crocodilians. He is also interested in vertebrate biomechanics and using living animals to better understand the anatomy, behavior, and evolution of extinct ones. Steve has led multiple paleontological, good Lord, Steve, it's Friday and I haven't had coffee, expeditions to remote parts of Queensland and the West Kimberley region of Western Australia. He is also involved in field-based research in New Zealand and in the Antarctic as a member of the Antarctic Peninsula Paleontology Project. I'd like to introduce Steve.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to our first in-person, face-to-face seminar for semester 2. It's exciting to be back here doing this sort of thing. So this talk today, it's something that I'm doing with some other people. This sort of emerged out of an ethics workshop that we did at a conference a couple of years ago and has really grown. And it's all about engagement with First Nations people and working together with First Nations people. So I'm going to have stuff from myself. There'll be stuff from a colleague of mine who I'm doing this with at La Trobe University, Gillian Garvey, and then also 2 of the TOs that we both work with, Daniel Rowe and Darren Perry. We'll be sharing some of their stories. Before I start, of course, I want to do an acknowledgement of country. For where we are now, we're on unceded traditional lands, and for the Meanjin Brisbane area, these lands have a connection to the Yagara, the Yugara and Turrbal people. I'm going to be talking a lot about the saltwater culture of the Galarabaloo in the West Kimberley, and primarily the people of the Nyunyulian language group that are united within a culture defined by a song cycle. So Bardi Jawi, Nyul Nyul, Numbal, Jabba Jabba, Yugan, Yaru, and Kurrajari peoples. And then Gillian will be talking about her work in northwest Victoria with Nig Tate and the First Nations people of the Milawa Malay. And then I also want to acknowledge any other First Nations people that are tuning in to this seminar. And just starting by doing this and thinking about what we're actually talking about when we do an acknowledgement of country. And I think it's primarily about recognising a connection to country and custodianship of country. And this sort of thing is often quite complicated, and it's complicated because of what's happened through colonisation, invasion, dispossession, assimilation, all the things that have occurred since 1788. I'm pretty sure acknowledgement of country would have been much simpler prior to that time. But when I talk about an acknowledgement of country, what is country? People can stand up and read palm cards about acknowledgements of country, but do they really appreciate what it means? And it's taken me a little while to get my head around what country actually is. And it's pretty much everything that exists within the natural world. So it's not just the landscape, that's part of it. It's animals, plants, rocks, water, soil. It's people now and people in the past. And this is why when you're doing acknowledgement, you talk about elders past, present and emerging. But it embraces other things that are sort of a little bit more intangible: seasons, stories, songs, law. All that goes into a concept of country. And one good way to sort of think of it, because philosophically it's very different to how we see the natural world, is it's not just a place, it's how you belong to a place and how you exist in a place. And a really useful concept is to think of country as a person, because you'll hear people talking about caring for country, singing to country, country's sick, country feels well. It is a living thing, okay? So when we, as non-Indigenous researchers, think about country and how to respect it, how do we do our research? Because a lot of the time it involves going out into the natural world and interfering with country. And for me as a paleontologist, that typically involves going out, digging a hole, finding fossils, taking them away, putting them in a museum. For ecologists, it might involve catching animals, taking samples. If you're a botanist, you go and collect plants. We do all these things without often thinking about how that might sit with First Nations people. So how do we go about doing our research? I'm going to take you through my own journey of sort of figuring out how to do this. I'm not going to make out that it's the only way to do it, but definitely the experience that I've had and how I've seen things starting to change about how we do stuff in paleontology. You should turn your phone off. Mum, don't call me during a talk. I think provides lots of valuable lessons and hopefully will give you some good ideas. So I'll talk about my story with the work I do in the Kimberley. I'll let Gillian talk about her story in Northwest Victoria. And hopefully this will get everyone thinking about, how do I do this? And there'll be some really key messages that I hope will come through. And with my story, it goes back a long way, but I think the genesis of it starts in the 1990s. And this is really a story of probably how not to do things, but initially a bit of naivety and arrogance on the side of Western scientists. And then a lot of things have stemmed from that. So this starts back in the 90s with an event that occurred on a beach north of Broome. And this ended up becoming the topic of a documentary series that SBS did. There are various books that came out of it. All sorts of things transpired as a result of what happened. So this is a little clip from a documentary that came out back then called The Dinosaur Dealers.
October 1996. In the dead of night, on a secluded beach in the far north of Australia, 2 stegosaur footprints are hacked out of the rock. The fossil rustlers know that this would be one of the few nights in the year when an exceptionally low tide leaves the footprints exposed. But this is no ordinary crime scene. It is also an Aboriginal sacred site.
I never break any laws or days, so they come and break mine. Only question I want to know is why they took them.
Joseph Rowe is an elder of the Gularabaloo. They are coastal or saltwater people. Their land surrounds Broome in the northwest of Australia. It's an area 3 times the size of Sydney. For Joseph, the missing footprints are more than just stolen fossils.
Well, all of these dinosaurs, and they fit into our culture like a hand on a glove. It's special to us. We only see their track, but we know where they come from. They come from Dreamtime.
According to Aboriginal belief, this land is part of a traditional song cycle. And the footprints were left not by a dinosaur, but by a Dreamtime being. A bird-like creature, more like an emu. So for Joe, this is not just a theft. It's a desecration of sacred ground.
It's just like the church. Church got his crosses, altars, chairs. You take the church away, what's going to happen? But it's in our book today, our blackfella book, cultural book, always here.
So we'll come back to this saga, but the key here is that dinosaur tracks in the Kimberley have been part of the knowledge system, and awareness of them goes back probably thousands of generations. What Joe is referring to is Morella. So Morella is one of the creation beings in this area. Kind of like you can think of him as a version of a rainbow serpent. He, in this area, is a lawgiver. So his journeys through country, in and out of the water, onto land, with other creation beings, with First People. It's all about encoding laws, ways to behave, ways to look after country, ways to interact with each other. He's a very key figure in the song cycle that goes along the coast of the Kimberley. And he left his mark in the land through these three-toed tracks, and then also in certain areas he left his ramu behind, ceremonial engravings where he had a law ground. So I might look at these things today and see that as a dinosaur footprint and this as the impression of a primitive cycad, but regardless, they are well known, very well known among certain peoples of the Kimberley. And Morella's not just in the landscape and in the stories, he's in the sky as well. He's the dark emu through the Milky Way. So this is another sort of version of that recognition and the reflection of song cycles into the night sky. So he's there everywhere, very present in the landscape and a very important figure culturally for people in this part of Australia. So Morella, while known for countless generations among First Nations people of the Kimberley, only really sort of came to the greater public attention in the 1990s. And this was a result of the West Australian Museum and the University of Queensland being taken to some of these sites where tracks were known to occur by some of the law bosses back at that time. Now, just like paleontologists do the world over and still tend to like to do, after they were shown these things, this group of paleontologists decided to go back there. It was called the Great Aussie Dino Hunt, and start to do what paleontologists do, document and collect things. And they took some tracks from this area and took them back to the West Australian Museum without asking. They even thought, we don't want to bother people by asking them, you know, we'll just get on with things, without realising how much hurt and suffering that was going to cause not only the lawmen who had responsibility for looking after these tracks, but it was also going to bring hurt on them as well. So it caused a lot of pain amongst not only traditional owners, but also the scientists. It had a lot of ramifications. And go back to dinosaur dealers, because after that initial discovery and that initial event and the documentary going out, everyone started to know about these tracks and thefts started to occur, not by the museum, but by professional fossil collectors. And then this is what happened.
It's an area that they hold very, very close to their heart.
Steve is heading out to the crime scene with Police Sergeant John Yates, who investigated the theft when it happened. Joe has agreed to take the two cops to the site, but John Long isn't invited. Joe and his people now regret their decision to allow museum scientists access to their sacred sites. Joe blames the theft on the publicity surrounding the discovery of the footprints. Now John Long is no longer welcome on Joe's land.
I can't really trust them anymore. Trust scientists, museum people. I don't know who we're going to trust anymore.
That's just something we have to live with. It's their land, it's their right to do what they want with it. I think if we're able to recover the stolen footprints and give them back to the traditional landowners, it would help a lot in restoring the museum's name to these people, and would make everybody happy.
So John wasn't just not invited. He was told if he ever turned up in that area, he'd be speared. And Joe was serious. So this was, you know, within a matter of years from, oh, well, we found all these cool dinosaur tracks, to all of a sudden this situation where the whole research program was shut down in a really serious way. That created a big schism in Australian paleontology, and also the way that, you know, people started to realise they had to work together with First Nations people like Joe. So that pretty much was the end of things as far as research went up there for a little while. Fast forward to 2009, and all of a sudden Colin Barnett's starting to tell people, no need to look here, there's nothing to worry about. And he was talking about a place called James Price Point, or Walmerton, which is where a lot of this stuff had happened in the past. Ironically, when he made this initial statement, he's pointing out that it's not like any of the places you see in Quantisads. These days, Quantisads use Walmerton quite regularly. It features a lot. The reason he was doing this was because there was a proposal. This is where it is on the Dampier Peninsula. This is Walmerton. There was a proposal that was backed by the West Australian government in a joint venture partnership with Woodside Petroleum, BHP, Shell, a whole heap of resource companies to put a huge liquid natural gas processing facility at Walmerton, this place here. And this is the headland, and all these rocks that you can see that are emerging as the tide retreats are from the Broome sandstone, and as you'll see, are literally covered in thousands of dinosaur tracks. And this was what was proposed. So this is Woodside's LNG precinct at Karratha on the Burrup Peninsula. What was proposed for JPP was several times the size of this. The project was initially valued at $35 billion, billion. And by the time sort of got to the delivery point, it was at 45 billion. Tell me a project that is of an equivalent cost and value. So there was a huge amount of shareholder money and government money behind this project. And the plan was to put this LNG precinct here with a harbour, pipelines extending over around 25 to 30 kilometres, effectively closing off that entire coastline. As part of the Browse strategic assessment that was run by the West Australian government, they asked the WA Museum to do a quick check for any dinosaur tracks in this area, because, you know, back in the 90s, wasn't there something up there? Galarabaloo, people like Joe, approached the museum because they were getting concerned, and they said, do you want us to show you where the tracks are? We can help. We can work together to do this. The West Australian Museum was like, no, look, this is paleontology. We don't need you guys. We'll be fine. They did this survey over a few days. They found maybe 2 or 3 tracks. And then that was the basis of the project going ahead, because there wasn't really anything there to worry about. We'd had the paleontologist checking out everything. It's all fine. But as far as the traditional custodians were concerned, it wasn't, because they knew there was far more there than what the West Australian Museum had seen. So opposition to this development really took off. Not only was it about protecting the songlines, protecting the tracks, it was about protecting country. And a lot of people in Broome, not only within the First Nations community, but the greater Broome community, very much opposed it. And it really started to take off about 2011. I got approached on radio to comment about it because, you know, there's some dinosaur tracks up there. I didn't really know anything about it. I knew about the thefts and things that had occurred. I knew it was very sensitive, so I was quite careful how I talked about it. But as a consequence of that, it was decided, Gallara Blue decided to approach me to see if I could come and do the science that the West Australian Museum hadn't been able to do, and would I want to work with them. I jumped at this opportunity because I thought this is going to be incredible without really knowing full well exactly what I was getting into. I pretty much arrived in Broome, got taken up to Womerton as the protests and the blockade that was there really took off, and it ended up there were like 150 riot police came up from Perth because the local police didn't want to get involved. That's the convoy of Woodside trying to get in to start to do their developmental drilling and stuff. It was really full on, and I had to get through these blockades to go and meet with the lawman from Gallara Blue. And at this stage, that's Phil, Joe and Richard. They're not in a real good mood. They've had to deal with the thefts that happened back in the 90s from letting scientists in. Now they're having to deal with this resource company trying to come in and acquire this land with the government. So I was pretty intimidated when I turned up because I knew, this is pretty much what I was confronted with, that this was really serious stuff, and I didn't want to get speared either. But I soon discovered this is about trying to work out who I am and how I respect what's important here. So the first thing I was pretty much taken from the plane straight up to the camp and told you need to meet everyone, you need to talk about it with them, let them guide the conversation. So initially, all I did was listen and talk and get to understand each other. It's about building up trust because that trust had been broken in the past. So I spent a lot of time with Richard and Phil. Joe was really busy with a lot of the blockade stuff. But we spent time together doing the research. It wasn't just me and show me where it is and I'll be right, or them doing it. We did it together. And I learned to read the landscape the same way they did, and they learned to read it the way I did. It was this really nice sharing of understanding of what the rocks were telling us. And we found so much stuff together. It really made me realize this idea of discovery that we all like to sort of tout when we do our science is such an arrogant and naive sort of way of thinking about things, because these tracks, these guys have known about them for a very long time. And I would have been just like the West Australian Museum, wandering around aimlessly on the beaches, not seeing anything, had it not been for them showing me where stuff was. So this was an example. Richard was like, hey, do you want to come over here, brush some sand off? Here's some amazing little tracks of a small meat-eating theropod dinosaur, the only ones on the entire coast. And without Richard, I would never have seen those. And that happened many, many times, okay? And also I found stuff, and I'll talk about how that sort of unfolded and what I was thinking about that a little bit later. A really great example of this was a few years later when a lady came across some tracks on Cable Beach. It went kind of viral. That's Bindi there. I ended up on breakfast programs in the UK talking with Bindi and hosts about these dinosaur tracks. And it was like, no one had ever seen these before. When I talked to Richard about this, he was like, yeah, well, that's Morella-goon. I'm like, what? So that's the place of Morella. It's a song cycle site. It had just been under sand for 40 years. But he knew exactly where it was. He knew all about it. It had just been covered in sand for 40 years. Bindi comes along in 2016, finds it. It's this amazing discovery. So this got me really starting to think about the fact that tapping into this knowledge is the way to go, because otherwise I'd never get anywhere. And doing it together is really fulfilling. One of the things we started to do as we did our research was figure out new ways to document the tracks and do our research. We obviously didn't want to take things out of country as had been done before because we knew all the problems that it caused. But now it's much easier to do stuff without it being destructive. So we did a lot of digital documentation, photogrammetry using drones and planes that allowed us to sort of see the tracks in a whole new light. Whoop. Battery's running out. So this is just a digital model of one of these platforms with tracks on it from Morella, what we call Megalosauropus brumensis. And it was really fun to see these things with the drone and do it with Gallara Blue, and both of us seeing them for the first time in this new manner. A lot of the time, we would be doing things and it felt like the rock was coming alive. And this was an example. Think back to the 1990s, this one supposed stegosaur track that got stolen. We ended up getting literally stampeded by stegosaur tracks. This is a trackway of a stegosaur that we found together. We ended up using Nunulian language names to describe these. So this is Gubina roworum, the roe family shield, as an armoured dinosaur. This one here just emerged one day. I was like, wow, that's incredible. Have you guys ever seen this? Because I kept thinking there must be specific tracks that relate to the song cycle, specific sites. And they were like, no, we've never seen that before. But this was all this idea of living country revealing things as needed. And it's not something that's happened in the past, it's happening now, and country will be happening again in the future. So we started to see all these things, and every time we did, it would be, I'd see Richard or someone just sort of smile and goes, Bulgaragar. That's the dreaming coming out as it needs to for everyone here doing our research, because we're caring for country and doing things on country as we should. So here's just an overview of the 6 different types of stegosaur tracks that we ended up finding. So I thought I was going to be, with my Western perception of what tracks mean and dinosaurs, I thought it was going to be in conflict with how they saw them. But I came to realise that this was all just part of an evolving knowledge that grew out of country. So it was complementary. What I was saying and discovering with them was complementary to what they were telling me, the same way I was integrating that knowledge into my science. And we were going forward together with this information. So recognising that and realising that, it wasn't a particular track or a spot. These tracks are part of the fabric of this landscape. They come and go all the time. And we saw many thousands of them. And they change, they get covered in sand, some of them get smashed in storms, new ones appear. And this evolution, this dynamism of the landscape is part of this concept of living country. It's a really cool way to start to think of it. One of the really exciting things was this here. You can see Richard's pretty stoked there, because this was, if you remember back to the dinosaur dealers, this was the track that started it all. That's it there. This is it's probably an ankylosaur, not a stegosaur. But this was the block that the West Australian Museum took that eventually got returned, and Richard's happy because it's still out on country. It's where it needs to be. We together not only took thousands of photos of it and made all these digital models, but we've also replicated it with silicon, and now I've got it preserved in plastic. This is it here. Okay, and the real thing's still out there somewhere amongst the rocks. Everyone's happy. I've got everything I need for my science. Richard has got what he wants because it's still on country. And it's kind of cool to think but that's where it is. And this is a different one that we ended up calling Lulu Ignis Mukii. I'll talk to you about Lulu and Mukii shortly. So at the end of all this, we've ended up with, rather than a few tracks and nothing to worry about, the most diverse dinosaur track fauna in the world. There's 21 different types of tracks spread along this coastline that supposedly had nothing in it. But that didn't come about just through straight up paleontological exploration. That came about through shared research, okay? My approach plus the First Nations knowledge approach. The alternative to what we now have there, which thankfully through this process got National Heritage listed, was this gas hub. Thankfully that fell over in 2013, and now this area is as it was, and country has gone quiet again after a very disruptive time. So a key part of this sort of partnership is about letting First Nations people have their own voice. In the past, it's always been, oh, you know, you're just the informant. Can you tell me some information? Thanks for that. I'll go and write my paper. We don't do that anymore. We let people like Daniel, who's a law boss for Gallaraballoo, talk about what he wants. So I've asked Daniel to do this little video, and I'll let him tell you how he sees all this.
Hello, my name is Daniel Rowe, and I'm a member of the Gallaraballoo family. We're custodians of the Broome area and the north coast of Broome, maintaining and looking after a lot of registered heritage sites, and as well as the dinosaur footprints for the region. Now, what the dinosaur footprints mean to us in a cultural sense is that it's part of our dreaming, which we call the Bugarigara. Bugarigara is the dream time, and we have maintained that same story and practices and continuance of looking after these sites for generations. We have a Dreamtime story that talks about Morella, the emu man, and in our Dreamtime story, he's a very important person. He's a lawgiver. He left laws behind and where people should behave and respect each other and respect their land. So far back, even though the dinosaur tracks are 130 million years old, we still hold stories, not as that old, but as part of our Dreamtime, Bugarigara. That's our cultural existence as being told today. And it's very important to us culturally. Now, working with scientists coming to study these tracks, fossils, it's a welcoming initiative that we embrace to share and research scientifically to understand the history in the dinosaur age. We also have protocols, I suppose, that we as Aboriginal people to understand that it's not to remove anything, just take photos, research, and leave things as they are. We have a belief that if things are disturbed, that there are consequences to it. As for us as custodians, but even to those that disturb these important places, as they are registered under the government and federal acts of heritage, there are those sort of consequences as well. We want to work closely with paleontologists and scientists to ensure that we're not disclosing so much about its location. It's important that we don't lose sight of that, and there are people out there that are bad people that look to destroy these sites for monetary value. Now, the work that we've done with the University of Queensland and Steve Salisbury were worth of, about 500 man hours tirelessly working, camping out bush and monitoring reefs, searching for tracks, even underwater. It was all fun, but it was all interesting and really engaging work to collectively, both culturally and scientifically, put information together to record for the wider population, both nationally and internationally. And we want to continue to do so, but in respect of how understanding both the cultural sensitivities and the protocols that we should abide by, and letting people know that it's there, but it's got to be acknowledged and properly welcomed to show where these places are because of its sensitivities. But yes, the work with Steve, a big thank you to them and his fellow researchers from the University of Queensland, and I'd like to say thank you very much, and I hope to look and share this part of the world with the wider world to come and the future generation, and preserving these important and significant sites, especially the 130 million year old tracks. In closing, thank you.
The key thing that's happening here is decolonisation of our science. And a colleague of mine who does a lot of work with Gallara Blue, Professor Stephen Muki from Flinders University, we've talked about this a lot. And the best way I can describe it is, in his words, it's about opening the knowledge valve. So for too long with Western science, it's been a one-way flow of knowledge. We go and get the knowledge and we do our stuff with it. People might have been consulted about things, but we took that knowledge and we used it how we thought. Opening up that valve so that it's a two-way street means that First Nations knowledge is given equal status. And while Phil may not have a doctorate, he's a law boss. He knows a lot of stuff about this landscape and about the things that both of us are interested in. So his knowledge, insofar as understanding this landscape, is as important as mine. And the results have been really rewarding. I mean, now we have a whole new audience that is engaged with our science because it's a shared journey. So, we ended up packaging everything into this huge big monograph, but all the young Gallara Blue kids are really into it because they know they're a part of this as well. We've got a community group set up in Broome called the Dinosaur Coast Management Group. Right now, there's a sort of engaging with dinosaurs festival happening. We've got lots of things happening with school groups, with camp schools, all about sharing this love of the dinosaur tracks, the culture and the science that goes with them. And just a few weeks ago, I managed to sort of somehow skirt through all the travel restrictions and border closures and things, and spent time with the lawmen up there visiting all the song cycle sites around the Dinosaur Coast, starting to use knowledge of those stories and locations and the song cycles to begin to track the dinosaur story in a way that I've never done before. And this is really exciting, what we're doing now. This is a huge midden near Broome. It's one of the emanation points for a song cycle, not only the one that has the dinosaur tracks in it, but others that go all the way to Uluru and from there to the East Coast. This network of knowledge is vast. So in all this, I mean, there's lots of things to consider. This is just my story and paleontology. Legislation for these things differs from state to state. Things are really moving better and faster in Victoria. They're now recognising tangible and intangible heritage. And we're starting to sort of use the idea of a cultural landscape. Without going into the details of that, because I'm going to let Gillian talk about it, just as an example, knowing how things have worked in WA as a consequence of a lot of the things that were happening during the gas hub saga, the West Australian government retrospectively relaxed a lot of its Aboriginal heritage laws to allow compulsory acquisition. They had to do it 3 times to get it through. But this is why Juukan Gorge happened. And this is why it's still a big issue, because all these sites were deregistered to allow for development to happen. So we've got to step beyond sometimes what's legislated and look towards doing what is right. Archaeologists have had to do this more than us because they're often dealing with human remains. I'm going to now introduce Gillian, who's a zooarchaeologist at La Trobe, to talk about how it works for her.
Hi everyone, and thank you Steve for inviting me to come and talk to your colleagues today. My name's Dr. Gillian Garvey and I'm a research fellow in the Department of Archaeology and History at La Trobe University. And just before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm recording this on the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country on the outskirts of Naarm, Melbourne, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So Steve has asked me to come along today and record this to talk a little bit about my journey of engaging with First Nations communities as part of my research. And I began life, if you like, my research life as a paleontologist, did my PhD, but since 2005, I have worked in Australian archaeology. So it's since then that I have been working with Aboriginal communities, different Aboriginal communities, both in Palaeontology in Tasmania and in Victoria, to better understand how people were living on that landscape in the past. And really, a lot of my work with First Nation communities has been shaped and influenced by a long-standing project that I've had in Northwest Victoria with Nintate and the First People of the Miller and Mallee communities. And I think you've just heard from Uncle Darren Perry. So it was really through working out on country with Uncle Darren and other community members that I began to realise that the archaeology was more than just that. I could look at it from a Western perspective of just the cultural material remains that were left from people living on that landscape through deep time. But with working with that community, I began to understand that there's a much deeper ongoing connection to those places, and that my skills as a researcher could be used to better help understand how their old people were living on that landscape and on country. So through this collaboration, I have really started to shape a lot of how I work with communities, how I engage, and more importantly, how I always try to ensure that it's a culturally safe place, respectful place, and that we are truly working in collaboration and not just collaboration on paper. I guess probably one of the best examples of the outcomes of some of that was that the research that I've been doing in Northwest Victoria helped shape a cultural open day that we had a couple of years ago at Ned's Corner. And that was a fantastic experience of being together with the traditional owners, with the landowners, Trust for Nature, who manage that property, with Parks Victoria, Catchment Mallee Authority, and researchers from La Trobe, where we were able to share our stories about that country with lots of people from the general public. And I think that's one of the really exciting impact and engagement exercises that our research can have. It can help shape not only what we do as researchers, but how people, the general public, see places. So a really important impact of what we can do. More recently, I've started working with colleagues from La Trobe University and a new project in Central Victoria as part of a recently funded ARC SRI. And that is working with the Dja Dja people of the Kulin Nation, and in particular on Yungbulung clan country. And that's a new project that we are still talking about with the traditional owners about our overall research agenda. We have 3 fantastic traditional owners who are heavily involved in the project and in the research, and are really keen to help shape this research for better outcomes for their people and for country. And so I put up collaborators here, Auntie Marilyn Nichols, Amos Atkinson, and Pauline Aggle. And it's a research project that from the start we are trying to ensure is collaborative. So a lot of the research in Victoria has been shaped by our legislation. We have really, really strict legislation in cultural heritage management since 2008. And so that really sets out the legal obligations that we have as researchers. But we want to go further than that. We want to ensure that it's not just permits that are being ticked off, but that we are shaping the research agendas through working with traditional owners, ensuring that the research we do helps their communities as well and helps build capacity and also helps them look after country going forward. So we have tried to make sure from the start that there are clear processes in place, that it's always culturally safe and respectful. Part of this is the legal side. So we have set up to ensure, obviously, that we have the right permits in place according to the respective legislation where we need them, whether it's on Crown land, etc. But also what Dja Dja Wurrung have done is they have their own research agreements that have been set up. So this ensures that their own cultural knowledge, their own intellectual property is looked after and respected in this process. So this outlines everything for how we go about publishing. We will talk about and can talk about what's acceptable to be published, what can't be published, how might they want something interpreted and represented as well. So it's ensuring that everything is safe for everybody. We are also doing this from a very practical side to try and lay out the foundations for this collaboration from the start. That's included setting up a steering committee that involves traditional owners and researchers so that we meet monthly. We have terms of reference set out, we take notes, so it's all documented. So that means all members of the community at any stage can go back and look at those notes and see what's been discussed at those committee meetings. We are setting up a language name that Dja Dja Wurrung are still determining so that it will go by both that and also its English name as well. We want to ensure that all information is shared with the entire clan. So we might do that in plain English reports, by recording seminars and sending them out to community so that they are always aware of what is going on and making sure that that information is clear and in a way that community needs it to be. And we try to ensure that our traditional ecological knowledge is always incorporated into the research design as well. And another important part of this is to ensure that we have adequate funding to cover the field reps that come out with us, but also to cover things like smoking ceremonies, welcome to country, and so on, so that we always, we know what community want and that we also have the resources to help cover that as well when necessary. We've also tried to ensure that our research design from a Western scientific perspective aligns with what the community want. So we have taken on board what the community have specified in their healthy country plans, and so that we can all work together towards what the community's ultimate goal, which is national heritage listing for their country. So we are all working together with that same agenda in place, which is protection for that place, which is, I think, as Western scientists or as First Nations people or as both, that's ultimately what we're all after, is we want to make sure that country is looked after. And one of the exciting ways that we're trying to do this is through incorporating those traditional knowledges and Western science, and that's actually incorporating strategies together. So the community in this part of Victoria is implementing cultural burning into part of their looking after country regime, and we're actually using that as one of our survey techniques for archaeological survey of the area. So we are working in tandem with the community so that they can look after country, and then that also helps us better understand the archaeological history of that place. So I hope that I've given you some ideas about working with First Nations community. I always say to students and to other colleagues that it might seem like it might inhibit research agendas sometimes, and it might make the process slower. But in the long run, in the long term, I think it gives you much more depth to research. It's greatly enhanced my research and given me a very, very different perspective of questions that I can ask about the past and going forwards and how country can be looked after in the future. So thank you.
All right, so just to finish off, I want to give the final word to Darren Perry. Darren really wraps this up nice. So it only goes for a few minutes, but this will be the end point for us.
Hello, I'm Darren Perry. I'm an Ninte Ngarkat man of the northwest of Victoria. I'm the chair of the First People of the Millway Mallee Aboriginal Corporation, which is our native title claim group. We're made up of 4 tribes: Ninte, Nyeri Nyeri, Lachi Lachi and Werrigaya. We have an ancient connection to our country. We have many thousands of generations of our people have been born, lived and died on our country. In that time, they have shared the journey of the country with them. They've seen many things come and go on country. One of those things in our country is megafauna. We know about all of these animals. Our old people were alive when they were alive. They shared that time in history with them. These are important sites to us. They're spiritual sites. They contain our history too. We've walked this land for many thousands and thousands of generations of our people. We have an intimate connection to it. Cultural heritage laws now say that everybody who does any research on our country needs to talk to us. This needs to broaden. Everybody needs to form a relationship with us traditional owners, because we got things to share. You won't have the whole story until you hear our part of the story. So get to know us. We can help you learn, and you can help us learn. And we're on the journey together then. So please, all we ask is you respect us and our country, and we will share with you. And then we can all know the bigger story. And it's one that belongs to all of us now. So help us tell the story the way we want. We don't want bits of our country being taken away. We don't want bones of the animals that were around with our old people taken away. Just like we don't want the bones of our old people taken away. We fought many years to stop the practice of removal of our skeletal remains. We won that battle. We don't want to have another battle. We just want to have a relationship. So please consider this whenever you do any research on our country. Thank you.
All right, I think that's a good place to stop. This is about starting a conversation, building relationships, and being respectful. If you want to know more about the sort of things we're doing within the school to facilitate this, on the staff intranet page, which I think everyone should be able to access, we've now got this First Nations engagement resource area. So definitely check it out. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. All right, we've got 5 minutes for questions. So has anyone got any questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Really cool knowing that there is like way forward. Two quick questions. How far are paleontology and other fields in science adopting this ethical practice? Or how much of an outlier you and your collaborators are in the big community? And second, is a common practice grant authorship to the traditional owners, either as a community or a collective or the individual person that is doing field work, and is something that they would value?
So first up, we're definitely in the minority. We're really trying to change, particularly how a lot of the old school researchers go about doing things. But I get a lot of solace from realizing that young people coming up are wanting to emulate this sort of stuff. So I think it'll change. It'll just take time, but we're getting there. But definitely in Australia, not a lot of this stuff is happening across the board in paleontology or archaeology even. As far as how you include people, it's all about having a discussion about it. A lot of the time, some people and communities may want to be there front and centre of a research grant. Other times they just want to be there as a part of it, helping with on-ground work in country. So it's all about talking to people. There's no hard and fast way to do it. We're trying more and more to integrate people and push them into how we see science and grants and stuff happening. They don't necessarily see that the same way all the time. So it differs from group to group.
Another question?
Yeah, all this stuff has to start to change. It takes time. You know, it's taken me 10 years to get to the point I'm at. And we didn't get our sort of main research grant until we were 4 years into our relationship. So granting bodies need to realise that this takes time. It takes money to cover not only the engagement, but also the things that happen during a grant. People aren't just going to do stuff for free. And it's far better that they're doing these sort of things in a way that gives them fulfillment financially as well. So just as you have to pay for certain aspects of research, this is going to become part of what you have to budget for. And granting bodies are going to have to get used to it because it's coming. It's already here, but it's going to hit people a lot harder very soon. So get on board. Robbie.
Love to talk, Steve. One of the biggest worries I have with is that you can engage often easily with the old fellows that share knowledge, but it's the next generation. How do you bring in the next generation? Do you work with the young fellows as well? Do you see them walking around flats with the old fellows?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we've been doing. It's about that continuance of knowledge. And I mean, there's how it happens on the ground, and then there's how it happens in the boardrooms and in the native title groups and the body corporates and country managers, all that stuff that you would know about. And I guess we just have to learn to navigate that new landscape somehow. And it's not easy. There's a lot of pitfalls and traps within the politics. But you just have to continue.
And how do you financially compensate that at the moment?
So through our grant, we always were including a cultural guide fee for any time people were coming out with us. And it was, ended up being quite substantial, spread over 3 years. That has to be built into your project.
How do you think, this is something I worry about, how do you think that affects the power imbalance? Because you see them as collaborators. If you had another scientific collaborator, you would never call them a collaborator if you're paying them. So how do you deal with that power imbalance of, a white fellow coming into the community?
Well, again, it's about at the beginning, before you devise it and figure out how this is going to work, what's the best way to set it up? How can we work within the system to make it equitable for everybody in the way that suits them? So not just dictating it. I know it's a tricky thing, but for a lot of these people, they don't have much of an income source. So to be able to generate one through a research project, if you can, is an important thing to do.
Sorry, we have a lecture.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, if everyone could just join me in thanking Steve once more.